Yes,
Yeah.
no, thumbs up. Fantastic. Thank you, Robert. So welcome everyone to our webinar. Thank you so much for being here very bright and early in the day. It's not a very long session and it's really mainly aimed at getting all of your questions in about how to compare solar proposals. So we will be hearing very briefly from Robert for about 10 minutes on some of the key points that you need to keep in mind. And then we're going to take questions that you might have or any kind of clarifications that you might need if you're currently in the process for the remainder of the time. Just to very quickly introduce myself and the agenda. So my name is Sanchi, and I currently work as the Decarbonization Advisor and the Fundraising Manager at Solar for Schools, which is a rather long title to say that I work with schools directly to help them implement their climate action plans, help them go solar, and then also deliver education as part of that program. And in our agenda for today, like I mentioned, we're going to be going through the different kind of funding providers that you might be exploring in your multiple solar proposals, what the economic drivers of those are and what you should be looking out for as the key three elements in your proposal, and any non-financial considerations. And Robert will be taking you through an example as well, time permitting, and then, like I mentioned, we'll be taking your questions. And if you have just arrived, as I can see a few people have, please can you introduce yourself with your name, your role, and the school or organization that you are at in the chat, please. And if you've got any questions, feel free to raise your hand. Alternatively, you can also drop those questions in the chat. And the webinar is being recorded and we will be sharing the recording after it's done. Now I'll pass over to you, Robert, to introduce yourself and then the company.
Thank you, Sanchi. I think most of you know of us, but for those who don't, we set up solar options for schools 10 years ago to bring funders, schools and installers together in a safe way for solar to happen on more schools. And the reason we do that is because we see the solar panels as a means to fund energy and decarbonization education into those schools. And that's why we really exist. That's our why. We use the solar panels and looking after the solar panels as a means to then fund energy and decarbonisation in those schools. We so far look after about 300 systems on schools, 300 schools in the UK and in a few other countries. And as I mentioned, our raison d'etre is the education piece. So we're not that worried or concerned about how you go solar. We're very concerned about actually helping you go solar. And then looking after that system for you and providing that education piece for you. So those who are working with us currently, if you choose to take another provider or use another installer or another funder, that's perfectly fine, as long as we maybe get a chance to then do the education piece for you later. Next. So there are sort of two routes that most schools take. One, they have some money themselves, or they've received a grant and wish to use it to own the system themselves. Or two, they don't have any money or have a very small amount of money and want to have it mainly funded by a third party. And we refer to those as EPC. If you're paying for it for yourself, stands for engineering, procurement, and construction. You're literally paying someone to do that for you. Or PPA, which is power purchase agreement, where you're literally just paying for the electricity you consume from that system and you let someone else worry about it all. In a way, the let someone else worry about it all is easier, but there's still some things that you need to consider. But I'm going to start with the assume you've got the money and you're going to pay for it, because the decisions that you need to make or the choices you need to compare are the same kind of decisions that the fund is going to have to do for you anyway. So it's worth understanding what they are. And the trickiest bit with solar is making sure you're comparing like with like, because a roof could have multiple different system sizes on it, and we'll come to that in a second. It's also not clear what the quality of the equipment is and what equipment's being used. And that's very hard for a school to judge. But if you're doing a PPA model, the funder has to worry about that because they need to look after the system for 25 years. So they'll pick equipment that makes sense. Again, with the installation, if you're doing the installation yourself, you need to pick an installer. Now, you may have a parent who runs an installation company and you trust them, and then that's fantastic. Or you may have to go wider afield, and then it's a little bit harder and you need to do some diligence. But I think, and I'll say this a number of times, the best way to find out is just check references. So if you're working with a local installer or a third-party funder, checking references is a very quick way of getting a good feel for the advice that they're providing you with and the work that they're going to do for you. At the end of the day, you're going to have to rely quite heavily on both the installer or the third-party funder to make sensible decisions on your behalf. So reference checking is a good way to get there. Then the other thing is, what's actually included. So, for example, if you're going to monitor this system and look after the system, having some monitoring equipment in, metering and monitoring equipment is pretty key. Is that included in the price? Is that included in the PPA? Then the other bit is around, are the saving forecasts that the third-party installer is providing you realistic? And we often see this, and I'll come to that in a second too, that they may over-egg the solar yield, and they may overestimate the amount of electricity that you're going to be using from that system. And that could then distort the economic return to you. So that's something to understand. We'll touch that in a second. And then in both cases, you need to make sure what are your liabilities and responsibilities, who covers costs if something goes wrong. Is the installer insured? Is the third-party funder suitably insured, for instance? But that's just a sort of high-level view. Jumping into the next slide. I'm going to come back to, if you're doing the capital cost piece and when you're trying to compare quotes, one of the challenges is making sure that you're comparing apples with apples. And in a way, comparing quotes if you are simply buying the system is a little bit easier, but you should make sure that it includes all the things that you see on that list, and that both quotes or all quotes have those things on that list. And by all means, ask questions as to what some of those mean. I won't go through them in great detail now. But often what you see with an installation quote, if you're getting pure installation, is that the first three items, the site survey, structural surveys, grid application, planning application, engineering design piece, are not necessarily included. They'll obviously do a design, but they may not have done planning, grid, and structural surveys. They may have expected you to do that or be a separate charge. So that's something to watch out for. On a fully funded PPA system, they will usually do all of that, but you may want to check that they actually do a structural survey on your behalf before they put some solar panels on your roof. Could we go to the, I think, next slide? Okay, so I think before that, I'm going to share my screen and go through an example. The objective of this is to give you a feel for some of the things that impact that you need to look at when comparing and how to compare different offers. So can you all see my screen?
Yes.
I'm looking at, we have this tool we call the Panelizer, where we integrated a financial model with multiple funding options. This is what this little drop down on the right here says. So we have the CBS, which is the Solar for Schools Community Benefit Society, which is the most popular funding option that we offer, or we work with. But we have in the past, Salix leases don't currently work anymore, but they're there for comparative reasons. The school can fund it. Guinness is a commercial funding provider that sadly is just stopping, no longer going to offer PPAs. SolarRel is a new commercial funding provider that we just added. And Milton Keynes is a community energy group that added their financial model to our system. And we're increasingly working with more community energy groups to add their funding models to the system and other funding providers to add more funding models to the system. So we can compare or provide multiple options to a school that you can compare on a like-by-like basis. So those are the sort of funding options. I'm going to start with just the school because in a way that provides us with the capital cost. So you can see here for this system, the school would have to invest £34,000, including all the work required to do that, which I mentioned in the list before. And it's a 36.8 kilowatt peak system. Now, if I added another set of panels to this to make it a bit larger, it's now a 44.3 kilowatt system costing, has the price changed? £39,240. Now, one of the things you'll see with solar is that there are certain economies of scale. As you get a larger system, the unit cost per kilowatt peak has dropped. I'm now just below £39,000 per 44 kilowatt system. It's slightly less than £1,000 per kilowatt. And before, if I go back, no, not bigger, smaller, sorry. At a 36, it was still slightly below, but if I make it much smaller, at some point, if you divide one by the other, your price is now 34,000 for a 30 kilowatt system. Sorry, 29,000. So it's now just about £1,000 per kilowatt. So there's an economy of scale of going for a bigger system. So that's something to be aware of. On the other hand, there's a counteracting force, which is as you get larger, the amount of electricity, obviously, as you install more solar, more of that solar will be available to the school, and the school will be able to use some of it. But there's a limit to that. Adding an infinitely large system to the school doesn't mean you'll cover all your electricity needs. Sorry, just a minute. Because the school, for example, will require electricity at night, which the solar panels can't provide. And equally, sometimes the school will be generating power, so the solar panels will be generating power, but the school's closed, like weekends and holidays. And this is what these two numbers reflect. Self-consumption is how much of the electricity generated by the panels is being used by the school. And you want that number to be as high as possible, because anything that's not consumed by the school is being spilt back to the grid. The grid pays peanuts for it. So you're basically wasting that investment. And solar rate is how much of the school's electricity consumption is being replaced. And these numbers are key because as the system changes size, those numbers change and those affect the economics. And you're trying to find the sweet spot between the largest possible system size that gives you economics of scale, but not so large that you're wasting most of it because it's just going back to the grid. And one of the easiest ways to find that out, for example, on this system, the 30 kilowatt system, your savings would be £125,000. That all sounds quite good. That's not including any repair costs. That's including maintenance, but it's not including any repairs or inverter replacements. But that looks quite promising. If I went to the larger system, let's go for a larger one, just making that bigger. Let's give it a few seconds to reset. The savings have gone up. So in this case, it might make sense to be a larger system. At some point, though, as you increase the system further, the savings will stop increasing effectively. So let me try and summarize. So the things that we need to watch out for is the size of the system has a big impact on the cost. So that's the first thing you need to do. Make sure you're comparing a similar size system. The size of the system will affect your economic savings. Other things that affect your economic savings are the yield. And what does yield mean? Yield basically means how many kilowatt hours of electricity is every unit of solar panel generating. 840 is quite low, and that's to indicate to some extent that we've got some east-facing solar panels. And if this number goes up, if it was a high yielding, look at the savings, 940, I'm change that to 940. The savings should have jumped up today. Wasn't watching at the same time. Let's go back again. Oops. Jumping all over the place.
It did move up. If
Okay,
you scroll down, yeah.
So one of the things to watch out when an installer is quoting and you're paying for it yourself is what figure are they quoting on yield, especially when they're telling you what your savings is going to be. It's some installers have an incentive to basically overstate the yield that you might be getting, because it'll make your economics look better and it may encourage you to install a larger system that is necessary. So that's one to work out. So check the size, check what yield they're suggesting, and then also check what solar rate and self-consumption figures they are assuming. Because often installers who are not familiar with schools may use a consumption profile in their software that's for a different type of building, and they may overestimate how much the school's actually going to use from those solar panels. So check those numbers, and that gives you a way of making sure that you've got your size, your yield, and your self-consumption and solar rates right. Then you now can compare like with like on a capital cost basis.
Just on that, if we just pause for a minute, and I just want to check and see if anyone has any questions so far. It's a lot of different points and some we might not have covered. And I just want to hear from the attendees.
I am going quite fast. Okay, so I'll recap size, solar yield, and then how much of that is being used and how much of that, well, there's particularly the self-consumption piece is important. The solar rate is useful to then calculate your savings because that's the number that is then factored in by whatever you're currently paying for your electricity to then work out these savings. Okay, I think that's probably a sort of high level view on that. When we're looking at PPAs, rather than the school funding, and I'm just going to switch to CBS, often you're trying to compare what the PPA price is, and you might get two quotes with a different rate of PPA. And then again, you need to check that the system sizes are the same, and that their yield assumptions are the same, and that their solar rates are the same. Now, if you get quotes, and we often do this for schools and trusts, we're happy to then put their figures into the calculator, so you've got a like-by-like comparison. Doesn't compel you to then use us. You can go ahead and use them, that's fine. As I said before, what we want you to is to go solar so that we can then look after the system for you long term and do the education piece. So by all means, feel free to ask and come to us with other proposals if you'd like to. So the other thing to watch out is that sometimes the lowest PPA doesn't necessarily mean the best option. In some cases, a slightly higher, bigger system, I'm going to do that here. So that's 23.2. I'm going to make the system just a bit larger by adding some more panels, waiting for it to recalculate. In this case, a slightly larger system gives you a slightly lower PPA, so we definitely should be going larger. I'm going to pretend we could go even larger. I think you'd struggle to squeeze that on that particular piece of roof. 23. Now the PPA has gone back up again. So you go, okay, we've just found the lowest possible electricity price, but the lowest possible electricity price may not be the highest savings. And as you can see here, I'm just going to go back a sec, look at the savings, 68,000. This is after all costs, everything, and no maintenance, no maintenance or insurance cost at all. That's literally the pure savings to the school. If I then go back a bit smaller.
We have a question, Robert.
Yeah.
So the question is if you can clarify what you mean with the PPA.
Okay, yes. So PPA stands for Power Purchase Agreement. And what it means is in a third-party funded system, you could either borrow the money. Most schools are not allowed to borrow money. You could lease it. You pay a fixed amount. That's currently very difficult. And so at the moment, until 2 weeks ago anyway, the only option was a power purchase agreement. And that is a contract you enter into that states that the third party, in exchange for borrowing your roof and putting solar panels on it, will sell you electricity at a pre-agreed rate. That's the power purchase agreement. And that's what this means. In this particular case, someone else would fund the system, and all you would have to do is pay 23.2p for every unit of electricity you actually consume from the system. And that's something, a good point you should check. Some PPAs are based not on how much the school uses, but on how much the system generates. You should avoid those ones, because if you don't use the electricity, you're paying for it, and it's basically going back to the grid. And you're getting 3.5 people going back to the grid. So you should always, most PPAs are now based on what you consume rather than what the system generates. But just watch out for that. So hopefully I've answered your question. You enter into agreement to pay a certain amount of electricity for every unit of electricity, and then the third party provider funds the system, looks after the system, and then sometimes provides a number of other services too. So the PPA providers that we have in our system, all of them have agreed to pay for us to look after it and deliver the education piece. But anyway, what I was saying was, though, that the lowest PPA doesn't necessarily mean the highest savings. You might be better off with a slightly larger system and a slightly higher PPA, which delivers bigger savings. So this was 61,000 at a 23.2 PPA, and let's just wait for it to recalculate, 23.7. It's an extra sort of 7,000 or 8,000 savings over the lifetime, and you've replaced 33% of your electricity. So sometimes a slightly bigger system and a slightly higher PPA is better, and that's why it's important to compare all those parameters so you're comparing like with like. Okay, back to your slides, Sanchi.
If you could stop sharing, or I could just take over sharing. Just before we resume, if anyone has any questions, you can use the chat feature, but please feel free to also raise your hand and speak up because we'd like to hear from you as well. Okay, can everyone see my screen? Great.
So we touched on this before, and then I think other considerations to compare. As part of a school's diligence, you are expected to get and compare multiple options. We can provide a number of options with the providers that we have, but you may also want to have, a local supplier or someone else to compare with, and we encourage that. It builds your confidence too to hear it from multiple parties. But I think other than price, you don't have to go for the cheapest option. And as you can see, the cheapest option doesn't necessarily mean the most savings. So there are the considerations. The total savings, if they've been calculated on a like-for-like basis, is one. The track record of the supplier is key. You should definitely check references. You may have a view in terms of whether they are nearby or local or national, what their coverage is. Some providers, including us, help the schools apply for grants where we know grants are available. We have a relationship with the National Grid that provides grants to schools in certain areas with high free school meal criteria, and others may have access to other grants. Then the agreements, terms and clauses is sort of nearly another area to look out for. But if you're entering into a power purchase agreement, you should watch out for contingent liabilities or obligations on the school side around having to pay for the system at the end of life. You may not want to keep the system, you may want the system removed, and whether that option is there. Or what happens, for example, if you need to re-roof during the lifetime of the solar panels. The CBS, for example, which is pretty friendly, school friendly, covers the removal and replacement of the solar panels if you need to re-roof. Not all PPA providers do that, so something to look out for.
And just very quickly, Robert, to interrupt you, on the CBS as well, key point to add is that schools are members of the CBS. So decisions are made with them, not for them. And I think that's one of the biggest advantages that you have with a third party, which is set up as a CBS.
Yeah. So yeah, definitely look at the governance and whether you have any say in that governance. Most community energy groups are governed by the people who fund them, but they're doing it for social impact. The CBS, as Sanchi pointed out, is unusual in that it's actually governed by the schools. The Solar for School CBS is governed by the schools because it was set up specifically for schools. And the other thing to look into is what happens with any spare cash, right? So all of them are based on a financial model that makes certain assumptions around how the system's going to perform. And most of them have a buffer in there for when things go wrong. But if things don't go wrong or things go better than planned, there'll be some money left over in the pot. What happens to that money? If it's a third-party commercial funder, they will keep that. If it's a community energy group, they will probably use that surplus to do good works in their local community. In the case of the Solar for School CBS, that goes back to the schools. The surplus after some performance bonuses that we get, and sometimes we get that from others too, the rest then goes back to the schools. So that's something to look into.
We have another question. So the question is, can we visit another like-for-like school that has solar panels installed to speak to them? And maybe, Robert, you can share your panelizer again, because this information can be seen using that.
Yes, so this is, let me share my screen here. So absolutely, we definitely recommend doing that. We visit all our schools once a year and to do the education piece. And that's a great time to come and see a school. Let me just make sure I'm sharing my screen. So for example, for every school, if this hopefully works, it sometimes takes a little while and it's not the most reliable feature on our website in our system, but it should show, yeah, there we go. So it's shown the location of the school that had been your school and the schools around it where we've already done solar panels or managing solar panels. So if you're working with us, we can give you a list of the nearest schools to you, and we can then also let you know when we're going to do an education visit at one of those schools, and you can join that. Or we can give you the contact details of the schools, and you can just have a chat with them and arrange a time to go and see them if you want.
Oftentimes, when we are organizing education visits, especially ones where MPs are visiting, so that students can practice their political advocacy skills and understand more about the local climate action plans that the MPs might have, we tend to invite schools nearby anyway, so they can speak to our educators and they can see the education program in action. But also, as Robert mentioned, if you need more clarity, depending on what stage of the process you're at, and you just want to hear from another school, we'd be happy to put you in touch with them.
We're starting to proactively try and reach out to schools that are in sort of discussion stage when we are visiting a school nearby to invite them to it. We haven't quite got our systems ready to do that automatically. So it's very helpful if you would like that, just let us know, and then it's easier to organize from your side. And I know Malcolm's on the call. So Malcolm, your schools are in Kent, aren't they? And Malcolm, I think, has already hosted a number of other schools who've wanted to sort of talk to them about the schools that we've done for the Vine Trust. So thank you, Malcolm, for having done that so far. Any other questions? We'll probably run this particular webinar every 6 months for those people going through the process. So it'd be great to have any feedback on areas that we think we should focus on more or take out, or it's quite difficult to cover it all in 25 minutes. So if there's areas that you would like to felt that we should have focused on, do let us know and we'll adjust accordingly.
Still got a few minutes, so if anyone's got any questions or any feedback that they'd like to share, that would be really helpful. If you were late to join, I did mention that we would be sharing the recording and the slides with everyone after. Kirsty, you have your hand up.
It's more an observation. I haven't got a question. It's more to say that I thought that was really useful actually, and seeing the display with the panels and how the numbers relate to the visual was really useful. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Kirsty, and thank you for attending as well.
And by the way, if we're trying to change our process a little bit to that earlier on in the conversations with schools, we actually spend a little bit of time on the panelizer going through all the options, because it's obviously very quick to then compare options online. And then once we've narrowed it down to sort of 2 or 3 options, then put that in a proposal that you can then share with the rest of the school. And the other thing that we've discovered recently, which makes the decision process within schools easier, is if whoever the champion is engages the chair of governors quite early on in the process, and we have a session with them too, that avoids having to go to sort of 3 sets of governors meetings before you get an approval.
Christopher?
Oh, yeah. I'm sure most authorities are the same, but obviously we have to demonstrate value for money. And it's a case of if we come to you, how do you guys do that when we come into a single service provider such as yourselves?
So I think one of the things we point out is we don't actually do the installation ourselves. We're not installers. Yeah, we manage a network of installers. We have 3 or 4 that we work with a lot, plus a roster of another dozen that we're gradually onboarding. Working in a school environment is particularly challenging. If a head teacher's or teachers in the middle of an exam and they say stop drilling, they have to stop drilling, and so you need installers who are very used to working in the school environment. So as I said, we've got 4 that we work with very closely at the moment, and we bring others on board. With those, we've negotiated framework agreements, so we know exactly how much they're going to charge us for a particular system size, and we can provide those numbers and the transparent costings to you. So our pricing model is all equipment is at cost. We basically pass it straight through. So the council we'll order it. The council could pay for the equipment directly. It gets delivered to site. So that's great value. We then just charge basically a project management fee, which is transparent. And so we can quite quickly demonstrate to you, and you could quite quickly then go and get comparative quotes to see how we compare if it's a council-funded rollout project. And we're working with a number of councils on that basis already. Leeds, one we've been working with for years. Durham, trying to think of the other ones. I'm currently working with
Redbridge.
Sheffield, Redbridge, both for ones that they're funding the projects. If you're funding the projects, you need to spend more time on the procurement side of things. If you're just simply providing the roof, then your asset management team has some insights or interest in making sure that what we're doing is not going to break your school. So we work with the asset management teams or the asset teams of the council. The legal team then needs to be involved in terms of signing off the long-term contracts because you're the landlord. But the procurement team doesn't need to be involved if they're not effectively buying or paying for the equipment. But they normally do because they want to see that the schools are getting a reasonable deal. But we can provide that transparently.
Yeah, no, that's great. I suppose it's how do you prove the value for money of the service that you're providing?
In terms of,
are there other organisations out there that can provide the same service, potentially cheaper? It's just that holistic approach. I get sort of downstream. You've got your framework agreements, and you can demonstrate from a procurement point of view the value for money, but it's the service that you provide, because obviously it's going to come at a cost.
oh, you mean our sort of advisory service, our sort of the consultancy piece work?
Yeah, and the fee that no doubt will be paid by the school. It's just, it's just ideally I'd like the whole picture. So yeah, okay, the install side and the maintenance side, that's fairly easy to quantify because you can get the like for like quotes, but I suppose it's your consultancy element.
So yeah, so we're like an insurance broker in that regard, that the school doesn't, unless they're doing a capital project, our development fee is paid for by the funder. Yeah, I mean, if the funder happens to be the school, then it's us, and it's transparent. So, for example, on this 51.8 kilowatt system, the total capex is 42,000, of which our fee is 8,180. And then what you then need to compare is if someone else provided the whole service that the end result was the same, what would the total cost be? And obviously, I would say this: we are very competitive. Because in the past, to make the economics work on a school, it was very, very, very tight. And we benchmark our total costs, all-in costs, with when a third party does the same. And we do have, I mean, our closest competitor, our harshest competitor actually is not the school not doing anything at all. Our closest competitor in this space is another community energy group that manages a whole bunch of community energy groups. They don't have the software platform to do it. They rely very heavily on the installers. And community energy groups provide these services too. And we work with a growing number of them where we provide this platform so that they can do their job more efficiently. But very happy to provide comparative quotes. And we do that with councils as part of their due diligence process in the early stages.
And that's what I think everyone's up against. We've got to prove the value for money. So
yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Can I just add, I've done a number of these now for schools, and the issue is always around proving value, but it's very difficult in a field where you've got different estimates from the PPA providers, all of the calculations like you talked about, they'll use it as a sales pitch. I've seen for the school I'm at the moment, quotes ranging from it as a financial value for the school of £3,000 a year to a value of £85,000 a year. So they'll use it as a sales pitch, and as you would with any quote, you have to try and evaluate what's realistic, and it's not always the best price or the best offer or the cheapest. It's what's going to meet your needs.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, it's not easy to compare like with like. I didn't quite hear all of your sentences. I might have been my end. I was cut off.
I was just saying it's a bit like buying insurance, as you said. Your different providers will tailor it. You'll have solar panels where other people say you can't put it on that roof. You'll have different rates in your PPA. it's a minefield.
Yeah, and which is why we increasingly work closely with the councils, so that the councils do some of the diligence on us, so that the schools don't have to. And that's one of the areas that councils can really help. Larger trusts, they've got the resources internally to work with us and work it all out. The challenge is an individual little school who really wants to do it, and the council is either not supportive just because they're too busy on other things. But in the last 9 months, we're seeing quite a significant change with councils proactively working with us, rather than being at the end of the trail when we then turn up and say, look, we need you to sign a 25-year lease.
We've got a couple of more questions. The first one is in the chat on about the current school loan restrictions and whether that means certain funding models are currently not viable.
Yes, so it depends again a little bit on the school and who owns the school, and because the rules are shifting a little bit. But generally speaking, schools are not allowed to borrow. Councils can borrow, but schools can't. It's a bit bizarre. So a council could borrow money from the public school and basically provide a grant to the school, or just simply pay for the system to be installed in a school. Not many councils do that. I think Cambridge and Oxford did variations of that, but most councils don't. Some of them are looking at it. The other option is you used to be able to go into an operating lease, but those operating leases, the clauses were so close to finance lease, which was not allowed, that Treasury pretty much clamped down on them. They're now reviewing that and reconsidering that, and there are rumours that Academy Trust will be able to enter into operating leases as properly structured. But Treasury is currently being superly overly cautious, right down to the point that they've currently blocked PPAs from being approved by the DFE, because some PPA providers were including clauses in them such as the school must buy the system back at the end of life, or if the school closes down, they have to pay an exit fee. And those contingent liabilities basically make it look like a loan, and if it's a loan, it has to be on the public debt or national debt, and therefore Treasury doesn't want that, and therefore requires Secretary of State approval. So they've made it really, really, really tight in terms of how you can fund a system. PPAs, I'm pretty sure, will come back and be available again. We're expecting that to happen in the next couple of weeks, but as long as they don't have contingent liabilities or long-term liabilities for the schools, which is what we expect.
And another question on whether our educational offering is our USP.
So I think there are two parts. One, our software platform that enables us to compare options very easily and quickly and make it as transparent as possible for schools to make a choice. And the idea is that that platform is going to be rolled out to councils and community energy groups and other partners around the world to enable schools to do this. So that's one angle. And the other angle, and that's the why we're doing this, is because of the education piece. So I don't think of our education as a USP. I think of our education as the reason we're here. But yes, I mean, other people do offer some levels of education. We hope and think and believe that ours is a step above that. Yeah, I guess from that point of view, it is a unique selling point.
I have also linked our education impact report that was produced earlier this year, summarizing last year in the slides, which is available for people to view and just kind of get into what we offer to schools and what we deliver also in terms of our app, our education portal, and so on and so forth. So if you are curious to learn more about that, I highly recommend checking that report out, which will be in the slides. We are now over. So if there aren't any more questions, maybe one last one. We've got a comment which says I think this is referring to the conversation we were having previously, Robert, which is Julie says that this is our issue as we are not part of an academy. So I don't know if you want to address that before we all.
So I mean, we probably need to do a session on the 19 people that need to get out of the way for solar projects to happen. And within a council, there are a number of people that need to be reassured or need to understand how it all works before they will sign off on it. And if you're a small school, individual council maintained school, and it's not a council that's currently working with us, that can be quite a long journey. But we spend a lot of time working with you and the council to go down that journey. The good news is, in the same way as Leeds, I remember the first project we ever did with Leeds Council. I remember screaming down at a lawyer from who wanted to charge £4,000 to review the lease and basically kill the project, to a point where now we do 5 or 6 schools a year for Leeds. So it takes a while, but we're happy to work with you to get there.
Great. And with
We need
that, I think we
champions. Be a
will.
champion.
Yes, if there's anything that you take from this webinar, help us help you and be a champion in your local community. Thank you so much to everyone for joining. Thank you for attending and taking time out for this. I know the summer break is just around the corner, so I hope you all have a fantastic summer ahead, and I hope to see you in the new year. Thank you. New academic year.